Good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 31st year of the Hemlock Society of San Diego. Yes. So we're talking about a very important topic today. It's a topic that many people say, oh, dying by not eating and drinking, that's terrible. I could never do that. And I understand that because I like to eat too. But a couple of studies were done on this subject. Not too many, but one, about 25 people who died that way in hospice care in Washington, I think. And then Boudouin Chabot, who's spoken here, a psychiatrist in Holland, did his dissertation on almost 100 families whose loved one died this way in Holland. And in Holland, you know, the laws are very liberal. And yet what he found was that most people who die in Holland, in the Netherlands, do it this way. They do it by refusing food and fluids, not using the law for different reasons. And there's reasons here in San Diego to use this method because we may not be eligible for the law or would have trouble finding a doctor, or a number of other reasons. And some people feel this is a more natural method. So anyway, the last few 5 meetings I think we've had are on different ways to have a peaceful death. So we've talked about the use of nitrogen through the final exit network. We've talked about hospice and palliative care. Can't remember what else we talked about, but this method, voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, is another method that you should know about. And then November 18th, our last meeting of this year, our November meeting of this year, will be about dementia. And we have asked a very prominent lawyer who knows all the ins and outs of this to talk about advanced directives in dementia and other things that I think you'll find very full program. We have talk by Dr. Bob Uslander and his team. We have a 20-minute movie about a doctor who used voluntary stopping eating and drinking to end his own life and videotaped it. And then we have some testimonials from people who are here, who've had experience in their own families or friends using voluntarily stopping eating and drinking as a method to die. So I'm turning it over now to Barry Price.
I saw this wonderful presentation that the Hemlock Society put on a few months back on nitrogen. And I saw that and I thought, this looks so painless and so quick. Why would I even bother checking into VSET? I mean, this old hat, who needs it? And then I got thinking a little bit more seriously as this meeting approached. And I began to think about all the kinds of situations that something more quick and maybe painless, like nitrogen, might not be available to me. Even though that's, I have final exit network on my speed dial. And some of you probably do as well. But there are lots of circumstances that might preclude me or you from looking for something quicker like that. And the more I thought about it, I thought, no, this makes a lot of sense. You know, Faye had mentioned some of the problems, and we all know what some of those problems are. We all live in San Diego, and we have access to the End-of-Life Option Act if we get within 6 months of being terminal. But, just because you live in San Diego doesn't mean you're necessarily going to die in San Diego. You may end up going somewhere else. If you have family, they may end up wanting you there so they can be around you more. And so, who knows, you might die in one of those states where there is no End-of-Life Option Act. Or even if you have End-of-Life Option Act, that covers such a small percentage of people, really. There's literally thousands and thousands of people who aren't covered by that act. So there are lots of reasons to think about, I guess, what I call, for me at least, Plan B. And maybe even Plan A, depending on sort of your view of how you want to end your life. Because as Faye pointed out, some studies indicate that people feel more comfortable, even when another option is available, a more rapid, in some ways more painless option is available. At some point they come to feel more comfortable with VSED as an option. And so I don't know how I'm going to feel at the end of my life, and that may be true for me or you as well. So we have lots of reasons to learn about VSED, and we're really fortunate today to have Dr. Bob Uslander with us, who can give us a lot of more information about VSED. And he's going to talk to us. He's got some members of his team with him, and we're going to have lots of opportunity to ask questions. And I'm sure this is one of those topics where there are going to be lots of questions, because as I looked at the topic myself, I started writing down questions. I had a lot of questions, and so I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions, and I'm looking forward to those as well. Some of you have seen Dr. Bob many times here, I think, or in some setting like this, and you know him already, but for those of you who don't, Dr. Bob Uslander was a long-time emergency room doctor. He now has a private practice in specializing basically in palliative care. His function is trying to close some of the gaps that exist in palliative care, gaps you don't know exist until you try to get palliative care, oftentimes. So his practice really is an effort to sort of close some of these gaps and provide the kind of end-of-life care that we all would hope to be able to enjoy. Without much further introduction, I'm just going to let Dr. Bob come up and tell us about VSED, and then we can pepper him with questions and answers as we go along. So, without any further ado. We thought you'd talk, and then we take the break and do the movie, and then, because the movie kind of illustrates some of the stuff.
Got it.
That's kind of it. Is that okay?
Yep, that's fine. You guys, is that okay with you? Order, me talk, and I guess my concern is that we can talk forever.
We won't
And
let him talk
sometimes,
forever.
and then because the questions that come up, so I'll give an introduction. We'll talk. I know that we'll want to do some questions and answers. Or do you want to save that until later?
I think what we thought about for a program was Dr. Bob is going to present, and then he's got a couple of team members who are going to answer some questions and inform us as well. And then we'll see a film, a short film, 20-minute film, which illustrates some of the things that Dr. Bob's talking about. And at the end of that, we can have a couple individuals who are going to give us some of their personal experiences with VSED. And then we would have a question and answer session at the end of that, where you could, if you haven't learned enough by all that, and you still have questions, you can give us questions and answers at the end. That's the program.
Okay.
Can you work with that?
Yep. So what's showing up? I know this. I mean, I'm in a unique environment here. Every time I come and speak to members of the Hemlock Society, I feel like I'm among my friends and family. A lot of times when I'm speaking on the community, I don't quite know what how to gauge the temperament. I find that more and more people are getting comfortable with this whole idea about talking about end of life, and you keep hearing how in our society death is a taboo topic and everyone's afraid to talk about it, and that's what's causing so much of the difficulties we have. What I'm finding, and maybe I'm going to skew the population and hang out with a particular group of people, but I'm finding that more and more people not only are comfortable talking about it, but want to talk about it. And unfortunately, the people who don't want to talk about it are the people in the medical community. So, really the only people in the medical community who are comfortable talking about about death and the actual end of life are the people in the hospice world, the palliative care world. But we need to get people comfortable upstream, because otherwise you're not being supported in having these conversations until things are at a certain point, and you're already a little bit behind the 8 ball a lot of times then. So I have had a chance to speak in front of many of you on different topics, and I think many of you know that my practice, integrated MD care, was created as Barry said, to fill a lot of the gaps in healthcare. And as an emergency physician for 20 years, I owned a home care company that provided non-medical home care. I then started doing palliative care and hospice, so going into people's homes and helping them through their complex situations, and then end of life, working with people in hospice. And I became more and more aware of all of these horrific gaps that existed in the care of people with complex and terminal illnesses. And these are gaps that a number of you are aware of now, but you weren't aware of them before you were immersed in a situation that became a crisis. I know you guys many of you have been around long enough to have been with loved ones who had complex and terminal illnesses. Some of you have probably gone through things on your own. And I'm sure there's a lot that you realize just doesn't make sense. How did this happen? How did we get here? Why wasn't I aware of this? Why am I so on my own trying to figure this out? And after having seen that enough times, I decided that it was time to try a different approach, to try to give people more access to what they really needed during these times of stress and when things got really complex. So we created integrated MD care back in about 2.5 years ago. And 6 months after I started that practice, the end-of-life option became active in California. And so I sort of naturally transitioned into helping to support people through medical aid in dying. I figured I was going to kind of fill a gap there as well. That's better. I was going to try to fill a gap there because there weren't physicians who were stepping up to support patients. And I figured, I'll do it for a bit, and then other doctors will figure out that how to help patients, and it'll become more available. And I don't think that's really happened yet, and certainly not in San Diego. So we've been moving, more into that vein of having people contact us to talk about all the questions that come up around end-of-life care, and try to help get more information and get be able to have honest conversations about what they can do to move towards a more gentle, peaceful, dignified, empowered end of life. So the End of Life Option Act has really been valuable in a number of respects, not just for the people who are wanting to take advantage of it, but it's opening up a lot more conversations. People are more open. They're wanting information, but they may be looking for guidance on a number of other other aspects as well. So my experience with VSED, even though it's not fast, we've had a number of encounters. We talk about it a lot because we've done a lot of research and we've looked to see what is available for people who want to have a peaceful and dignified, empowered end of life, but they may not be eligible for medical aid in dying. Either they don't have a terminal illness, they don't live in California, there's a number of factors. And we've become, I think, experts in helping to gather the information and guide people to understand what's necessary as you start approaching the possibility of doing VSED. And we have supported a number of patients through it, so I can share some of those experiences. And I think doing that, sharing some of those experiences, is probably the best way to give you a true understanding of what it's like. I know there's a couple people who will speak about their own personal experience, and you'll see the film. I have a couple of members of my team, of the Integrated MD Care team, who are here, and we all contribute to the experience for a family who's supporting a loved one through VSED. And it's not simple, it's not easy, but when it's done right, when it's orchestrated the right way with the right support, it can be extremely gentle and peaceful and beautiful. But it takes a team. It takes a team to be able to make that happen. So I just want to introduce Elizabeth Semenova, who's my practice director and a social worker and an incredible resource. And they'll come up and maybe speak a little bit about what they contribute to the experience, because they do things that I don't do. Jennifer Durant is nurse, our RN director of nursing. here is Heather Wilson, who's our practice coordinator. And Judy Baker's over here, and she's our nurse as well, who helps support patients through all of our processes. And before, I want to make sure everyone understands, integrated MD care. Do you miss anybody? This is my son Eric, who came. He lives in Portland, so he's here visiting. So hi, Eric. I want to make sure everyone understands we help support people through the final phase of life, and that's really important. It's an important part of what we do because everyone's going to die, and everyone deserves to have the most empowered and dignified death. But our primary focus is on helping people live better. And whenever we go to meet somebody who's talking about wanting to learn more about end of life, we always look at how we can make their life better, how we can partner with them and with their families and other resources that are out there to give them the absolute best possible quality of life. And I'll share a couple of stories that illustrate that as well. So the first person who I was asked to support through VSED, a man named Dave. He was in his late 80s, and he was in the kind of early to mid stages of Alzheimer's disease. So he was otherwise very healthy. He'd been an athlete all his life and very successful. And I gave a presentation about palliative care, and then his wife came up to me afterwards and said, "Can I talk to you about my husband?" And I ended up going and meeting with them the next day. And he had Alzheimer's disease, but he couldn't, like if he was downstairs, and he lived in a very nice independent living community, if he was downstairs in the dining room, he wouldn't be able to find his way back to his apartment. If he met somebody, he may not remember who they were the next day. But he was very clear of what his condition was and what the future held for him. And he was adamant that he wasn't going to put his family through that he didn't want to spend the next 7 years progressively declining and being put in institutionalized. So he was very determined to take matters into his own hands and to somehow allow this to end before he lost the ability to do that, before he could no longer make that choice. So we sat and we spoke with his children, adult children who came in, and his wife, and everybody weighed in. And of course, as you can imagine, initially everybody was kind of appalled about the fact that he wanted to do this. And after some discussion about the likely other scenarios.
This might be a better mic for you.
You guys, oh, that's so much better. Okay, I'm gonna start over. So, hi, I'm Dr. Bobby Uslander. I'd like you to introduce you to my team. So we talked about what he wanted, and this was the first time I had been exposed to this, so it was new for me, and it wasn't something that I didn't know much about it. I'd been a physician for 25 years, and I really knew nothing about this concept of VSED. And I was in palliative care in hospice. I knew people sometimes stopped eating and drinking and died, but I really hadn't given a whole lot of thought to people doing it intentionally. So the first thing, I needed some time to wrap my head around it, and one of the things that was so poignant about this gentleman is he was obviously so well loved, and his family was so devoted to him and he to them, and he was willing to do what he needed to do to avoid putting them through what he knew would be a long period of agony for them. A few weeks earlier, he had been asked to see a psychologist. I think that at the facility they recognized that he wasn't thinking clearly, he was getting lost, and then they encouraged him to see a psychologist who came and evaluated him, and he let this person know that he was thinking about doing something. This was not acceptable to him, and the response of that psychologist was to put him on a 5150 hold and have him go to a psychiatric hospital. That's being repeated over and over again. So this is something that happens not infrequently. So is it any wonder why people are afraid to talk about what they're really experiencing and what they really want? So there's this fear on so many levels of people not being able to share what they're really going through and feeling. So I said, I asked him if he'd be willing to go on antidepressants for a couple weeks. I knew that wasn't going to change anything. I just needed a little time to think about it. And so he made that commitment. He got on antidepressants, and I went back and I met with him a couple weeks later, and he was still very much, gung-ho towards this. His family had a lot of time to think about it. We had some more conversations, and so the decision was to go forward. That was I think I met him on a Friday, and the plan was to start this on Sunday. Because he was living in a community, an independent living community, we ended up getting him onto hospice care. The hospice was willing to admit him, even though he probably didn't officially qualify at that point. So they were willing to go out on a limb a little bit. We started the process. Unfortunately, this facility would not allow him to keep the medications that we needed for him in the unit, so the nurses had control of these things, which is something we have now learned that we have to be aware of and concerned about, because when we do this, and I'll share more about how we go about it, we need to have, the family and the physician and the patient as a team need to have access to what they need to ensure the comfort. And when we give up that control to other forces, it just invites problems. So we started on Sunday. He didn't have anything to eat or drink. Sunday afternoon rolls around, and he asked his wife for a martini. He forgot. He had his martini. We started again on Monday. It went forward. Ultimately, he died in about 11 days. It was my first experience. It wasn't the most positive experience, partly because of the fact that we didn't have full control and we were learning a bit as we went along. But he got what he wanted. The family was supported. They are grateful, and his wife has spoken on several occasions in discussions like this, and is a proponent. So that was the first. That was several years ago. That was when I was still working in the traditional palliative care world, not with my current team. The second encounter I had was with a gentleman named Hugh, and he had Parkinson's disease, and he was an amazing man who was brilliant. He had led spiritual retreats. He became a very wise and a successful man who developed Parkinson's disease, and it was a pretty aggressive form and a pretty rapidly progressive form of Parkinson's disease. And he had all of his faculties, but he was losing his ability to function. He could no longer walk. He felt everything just kind of involuting, and he made it very clear that he had a different path. He did a whole bunch of research. He actually helped me learn about the process. He had done so much research. He bought Phyllis Schachter's book. He introduced me to the book, and we formed a really beautiful team of support for him, using some of the information that we had learned before, some of the new information that was coming to us, and we prepared very well. We kept it very quiet. The people in the community where he was living didn't know what was going on. It was kept very quiet among a very small group of people, and he approached it like it was a great adventure. He was going on a great adventure, and each day of the experience brought something new to him, and he shared with the people around him. It was almost like he was the high priest and that went incredibly beautifully, because we had a lot of control over the experience, and he was so present. When somebody starts the VSED process, we typically, especially if they know that this is something they're planning to do, we encourage them to spend a bit of a week or so before to start reducing the amount of food and water they're taking in, so their body is already getting a bit prepared for it, and it's not such a stark transition. In most cases, a person who's relatively, healthy. It doesn't have a lot of, it hasn't been wasting away, it doesn't have a lot of chronic debilitating diseases, will stay awake without having any food or water for 4 or 5 days. Sometimes a little bit less, could be a little bit longer. Those first several days are, you might wonder if they're painful, if there's a lot of discomfort associated with it, and in our experience, there isn't. The thing that people sometimes experience is dryness. Their mouth gets dry, their lips get dry, their throat gets dry. And we're able to really help to reduce any discomfort with that just by using sponges, like swab sponges, and spray mister. We get some very nice Evian misting spray, and we don't skimp. I think it's $8 for a little thing, but the patients are worth it. And that's used. It's interesting because the thirst mechanism, when the human body is dehydrating, it creates the responses for the mucous membranes to get dry and to develop a sense of thirst. Most people otherwise don't have any pain or any other symptoms associated with being dehydrated aside from getting weak and tired. When the mucous membranes get moistened, either by the sponges or the sprays, it tricks the body into thinking that it's getting fluids. So the thirst mechanism goes away, it diminishes. So thirst in and of itself doesn't cause pain. Hunger can cause, if you have hunger pains, it's something that some people will sometimes deal with, but it's not true pain, and through different types of processes, sometimes we help people to become more mindful and to do breathing exercises and meditation. And sometimes we use medication to help reduce any sense of discomfort or angst associated with that. The one thing that most people, that helps keep people going at this point, where they don't feel that they need a whole lot of additional outside support in terms of medication, is that they're motivated. For someone to go through this process, you need to be very motivated, and you need to be certain that you're done, that this is the path that you want to take. And so it's so empowering. Most of the people, I'd say everyone who we've supported through this, has felt so empowered by their decisions. And as long as the people who are with them and their families and the people who are supporting them are on board and not creating conflict for them, there's so little that's pulling them away. They have so little anxiety. They have this period of time, often days, to reflect on what they're doing, to reflect on who's with them, to have closure with their loved ones. And we found that so often those days are filled with joy, with wonderful memories and wonderful support and conversations about their travels. Sometimes it depends on each individual. Sometimes they're joking around about eating. They're telling you what they would eat if they could eat. Sometimes they don't want to hear about food, and they don't want to talk about that wonderful meal they had in Tuscany. But everyone's different. Everyone approaches this differently. Well, one of the other things that often happens is several days into this, as the body is being depleted of nutrition and you're sort of breaking down, starts breaking down muscle and fats as all your carbohydrates are gone, the body goes into a state of ketosis. And a lot of times when these ketones are coursing through the body, it creates almost a euphoria. It's sort of like endorphins in your system. And so several of our patients, 3 or 4 days into this process, become very open to, they become almost spiritual, and they're elated, and they are not feeling pain. They're actually feeling a sense of euphoria, which is, you wouldn't expect when they're ready, kind of moving to this place of shortly thereafter becoming unconscious and moving towards death. But it's something that we've experienced, and and it's been actually very, I think it's something that's reassuring for families to see their loved ones go through that. A lot of people at the start of a VSED are already on medications. Many people are taking pain medication or anxiety medication or various things. And so we'll look at each person, at each individual situation to determine what medications should be continued and try to find a way to give them that doesn't require them to swallow it. A lot of times we'll transition people who are on pain medication to using a pain patch, so just absorbing through their system. Or we can use liquid, high concentrated liquid morphine or liquid anti-anxiety medications. And each person gets to determine, tell us at the beginning, how much medication they want. Do you want to be more sedated or less sedated? Do you want to stay more alert through the process or less alert, or less alert if necessary? The nice thing about VSED is it's not sudden. When you think about comparing VSED to medical aid in dying, well, medical aid in dying, there's a lot that goes into it. It's more of a process. There's a legal process. When they get the medication and they're ready to take it, it's all or nothing, right? If that's your decision, they'll take the medication and there's no turning back. One of the nice things about VSED is there is the opportunity for at least several days to change your mind and reconsider, and all it takes is a glass of water, right? If you go too far along, there's other complications and issues that may become irreversible, but at least for the several days into it, this is a decision that people make over and over again, and they reconfirm with their loved ones. This is my decision. This is what I want. After typically 4 or 5 days, the person will slip into unconsciousness, and at that point they will usually remain unconscious. And the reason for that is they become dehydrated. It's not really the malnutrition, it's the dehydration. Once people become dehydrated to a certain point, they essentially go into a coma. Again, before this happens, we spend a lot of time talking with the person to find out how they want us to address things at that point. Do you want to be more heavily medicated, sedated, even if it means that it may shorten your life? We're not euthanizing people, but we are certainly comforting them, and we're allowing them to guide how deeply sedated they would want to be. And it's hard we don't really know if people are aware of what's happening around them when they're in this state. We certainly like to think that there's some sense of awareness of who's with you, the energy, the love that's being expressed. And some people say, you know what, just sedate me as heavily as it takes. And if I die, that's fine. There's a range, and we try to be sensitive to the individual and allow their families to be part of that decision as well, in partnership with us. Most of the time, the death occurs within 8 to 12 days. When we're engaged with the patient and the family, and it's in an environment where we have a lot of control over it, there aren't, it's not in an institution where they're hovering and watching how much medication is being administered, or if we have a good team with the right hospice people, then we're able to keep people much more deep, I think in general, more deeply sedated and comfortable, and the time frame is usually less. For people who are younger and healthier, have a healthier cardiovascular system, the time frame could be more. So once the individual who's doing VSED slips into unconsciousness, their struggle is over. But the loved ones is not. And that's where we become we're involved through all stages of this, but then it becomes it's a different scenario, and there's different needs, and we engage differently. Because at that point, the individual can no longer guide it. And so it's critical
that everybody knows that they have a team that's there anytime, day or night, weekday, weekend, to make sure that what is supposed to be happening is happening. And I feel like each of the encounters that we've been part of has gone beautifully for the individual. Most of the time, the vast majority go really, really well, really smoothly for the family members. There's been a couple that have gone on a bit longer because there has been some interference. And so it's really critical that each time we learn where we need to put our foot down on certain things and how to guide things a little bit better and a little bit differently. The oldest patient that we've supported through this was 98. But the oldest patient that I've cared for was a gentleman who was 106, who did medical aid in dying. And he had the hardest time finding a doctor who would claim that he was terminal. It went on for months and months. He was 106 years old and he couldn't find someone to help him. Why do people ask for help with visa? Why do people want to die? Well, we know the answer to that. Well, who are the people who are making this request? Some of them are people who are ready to die. They're ready for things to be over. Their struggle to be over, and they don't qualify for medical aid in dying. They have conditions that, like Dave, like the first gentleman, or Hugh, the one, if their condition cannot clear, if you can't comfortably say that it's reasonable to believe that you'll die within 6 months with that condition, then they don't qualify for medical aid in dying. Even if they're 106, unfortunately, but there's ways. And so these are folks who we have to look for all the different possibilities, all the options. So we explore what they're experiencing, what we can do to help make things better, and if they're truly determined that this is the course they want to take, and they're competent to make decisions, then we'll support them. We'll go through the process with them. There's a number of people that we've met who approached us about medical aid in dying and actually did qualify, but as you're probably aware, for the End of Life Option Act, there's a 15-day waiting period in order for somebody to make the first request of the physician and the second request. The whole process can't go any quicker than 15 days. And there are a number of people who are struggling so significantly that they can't imagine going on for another 15 days because of the pain, because they're worried that the condition they have is going to make it impossible for them to make it 15 days, to be able to swallow, to be alert. So they're declining too quickly, or they're struggling too much, and they can't even imagine going that long. So in those cases, sometimes they'll start the aid in dying process, but they'll also understand that at any point in time they can start the VSED process. So they have they have option A and option B, and they can do them both at the same time. And if 3 days into not eating and drinking, they feel that they're willing to wait, they're comfortable enough, then they can reverse that. They can start eating or drinking again. I haven't actually seen that happen, but it's nice for them to know that they have the option. Voluntarily stopping eating and drinking is not suicide. That may be a question that people ask. I've actually wondered about that. If somebody who doesn't have a terminal illness decides that they're going to stop eating and drinking and allow their life to come to an end, what's their diagnosis? What do we put on the death certificate that makes it not appear that they took their own life? I checked with the San Diego County Medical Examiner, and he very clearly said, if we have a patient whose life ended through this process, suicide is not, it's not suicide. The cause of death may be dehydration, it could be inanition, which is not eating or drinking, It could be their underlying illness, but I think it's important for everyone to understand it's not suicide. And for the loved ones who are going to be there to support somebody through this process, you don't have to fear that you're going to be accused of abetting a suicide.
Is it legal?
It is completely 100% legal. For a competent adult to make the decision to stop eating and drinking, it is completely legal. If somebody tries to force that person to eat or drink, puts food in their mouths, starts an IV to hydrate them, and they've made it very clear that that they don't want any of that, it's actually illegal to do that. You're essentially, that could be considered battery if somebody tries to make that, to force them. I'm going to open it up for some questions, all right? And what I'd like to do is, if there are questions that are clinical nursing type questions, or questions that have to do with other things that I feel like any of my team members would be better answering, I'm going to ask them to do that, okay?
Now, do you want to announce that we're filming this and don't ask a question if you don't want to be recorded?
We are filming this, and you don't want to be recorded asking a question, you can ask to have the video stopped, right?
Yes.
That was correct?
Yes.
Because I don't want you to not ask your question. And we're going to have a mic runner to pass the mic around. So we got 2 mics there, so if you raise your hand, we'll bring the mic over and you can ask.
Hey, the mic over here is not working. Have you got it turned on?
Can you hear this? No, I think it is working.
Yes.
It's working.
Okay, or there you go. I'm going to let you be in control.
Would taking a diuretic shorten the time that it takes?
The question was, would taking a diuretic shorten the time that it takes? I honestly don't know the answer to that. It's an interesting question. It may, but probably not significantly.
Is it legal everywhere? Is it legal everywhere or just in California?
No, this is legal anywhere. It is perfectly legal anywhere I can say confidently in the United States. I can't confidently say that about any other countries, but in the United States it is absolutely legal for a person who's competent to stop eating and drinking.
A fundamental thing that I'm still not clear on. If I came to your team next week, and said I want to be part of your process, I do or I do not need approval from a couple of doctors that I have a terminal condition.
Got it. Question is, if he decided next week that he wanted to stop eating and drinking and allow his life to come to an end, would he need approval from any other physicians? Is there a legal process that he has to go through? And the answer is no. You just need to convince my team and I that what you're experiencing is well thought, is reasonable, and that it's well thought out. You understand the consequences, and we would need to determine if we're comfortable supporting that. We're not going to just, if somebody calls me, I got a call from a couple days ago from a 30-year-old in Orange County who said, I've been depressed my whole life. I have not wanted to be alive for the last 10 years. I don't know what to do. I just want support in allowing my life in dying. And I want to give him resources. I want to help this gentleman. I'm not going to help 30-year-olds who have major depression, end their life, right? There's a process. I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody around this to help people find the right resources. We had an interesting case a couple weeks ago. Elizabeth and I went out to meet a woman who was in her early 90s, and she was an amazing woman, had been recognized as one of the top teachers in the country, and had just a wonderful career, wonderful family. 2 years ago, she had a stroke, and she lost the ability to speak. She could speak some, but she had expressive aphasia, so she could think everything she wanted to think, but it came out garbled for the most part. And she was limited in her mobility, in her eyesight, so reading was really challenging. So her life had involuted quite a bit. She had 24-hour caregivers who were there to make sure she was safe, as a daughter and son who both lived in the LA area. And for the past year, every time they talked to her or were with her, all she would tell them is that she wants to die. It's the conversation always revolved around wanting to die. And finally, they said, okay, Mom, if we're really serious about it, we'll bring somebody here to talk to you about dying. And so they initially brought a spiritual counselor who encouraged them to contact me, and we went and we talked through all the different possibilities. I thought that she would qualify for medical aid in dying based on her condition. We talked about the voluntary stopping eating and drinking. We talked about all the possibilities. And then we also said, but we also have access to these people who might give your life more joy. We have music therapists and physical therapists. We talked about the things that were missing from her life that were making it so that she really didn't want to be alive. And we left. And the next day, her son sent an email and said, oh, Mom doesn't want to die anymore. She wants to live, but she wants to live better. So she's now getting a music therapist to come to her home twice a week, a physical therapist who's coming twice a week, and she's thriving. I mean, this may be a short-lived thing, or it may go on for years. Our experience has been people who feel like they're ready to die, or who have been given a relatively short prognosis, when they have the conversation, when they understand that what's possible for them, that they do have more control and options, and that there are people in the world who want to come and give them more of a reason to live, they may choose that. And when they do, incredible things happen. So, just wanted to add that.
I have a lady in the balcony, Doctor.
And no, I don't know if I'm speaking out of line. It's just a matter of, this is also new to me. I just found out about what you do. And I would really like to see the movie so I can get an idea of what it is you're talking about.
We will shortly.
Okay.
Yeah, we will shortly. We'll take a few more questions and then we'll have a chance to do that.
I'd like to ask, what is being done to educate doctors so you're not the only game in town?
You know, I think that's happening I'm going to a conference in Orange at Chapman University in October. There's other conferences that are happening. There's the Right to Die societies. But those are things that doctors have to volunteer to go to, right? They have to take their time. So probably not enough, for sure. One of the things that I'm hoping will be happening is we started a foundation recently called Integrated Life Care Foundation. It's just recently got its 501c3 designation. One of the main pillars of the foundation is education. So it's education to the community, and it's going to be education and training for physicians around how to have these conversations and what's available. Because I would imagine that most physicians, the vast majority of physicians, if a patient brings up the idea of stopping eating and drinking to them, they would kind of be appalled and say, what a horrible way to die. Why would you want to starve yourself? And it's a disservice. It's kind of continuing this sense of we know best and you don't know, and we're not going to bridge that.
Can we have maybe one more question and then show the
Couple
film?
Couple more. You've been waiting the entire time, so I got you.
I wondered if there's any communities in this country where states have Right to Die Acts, where the doctors are more accommodating than what goes on here. I mean, are there any communities? The other thing I want to mention, a friend of mine, when her father was over at Mercy Hospital and near death, well, not near death, he had 2 strokes. The doctor there said, I'll tell you what I did for my father. I withheld food and water. That's what we did. And he died about 8 days later. But he said, I'll tell you, my family is still angry with me today when I did it with my father. He was a physician from New York originally.
Yeah. So to answer the first question, are there communities where it's easier to find support for medical aid in dying or end-of-life care? I don't know. Since medical aid in dying has been legal in Oregon for over 20 years, I would assume that they have that they have processes.
Well, I know that they have hospices more supportive in Oregon.
More than, yes. and that will be helpful if we do have hospices that are more supportive, at least in helping to give resources. And we've seen for positive movement in that direction over the past couple of years. And there's a lot of people who are helping their loved ones through this process as well, who have reached advanced stages of dementia or other conditions. And this is happening all over, and it's not being spoken about, right? It's not common for people to talk about what they did to help their loved ones. Just like doctors have been helping to essentially slowly euthanize people in intensive care units and in hospitals forever, and that's still happening. But we need to get the conversation broader and get more people comfortable so that it doesn't have to feel like it's always that there's something sinister going on. You've been so patient.
Thank you. I know with the compassionate death, you have to be of sound mind. What if somebody has voiced to all family members and everyone long before that happens that I want to die? Would you honor that, even though the person is not of sound mind at the time, because it's all written down?
That's a really delicate subject. And one of the things that we're doing when we meet with people to talk about their plans, their life care planning, we make sure that we have documentation in place for them to make that decision in advance and give the directive to their loved ones and their healthcare agent that if I become cognitively impaired and I don't know who I am, can't carry on a meaningful conversation, not only do I not want you to give me life-prolonging treatments, but I want you to withhold food and water. And so we have documentation. If somebody doesn't have that, if they haven't gone through the process and had it documented clearly, it's very difficult to provide that support for a physician in a legal fashion. So so I would say we have to take every situation and look at all the factors involved, but yeah. We can have a conversation about anything. There's nothing wrong with a conversation. You can't get in trouble for a conversation.
Read about one of our county people who do autopsies or whatever they're called, the coroners.
Oh yeah,
I want to make sure that I'm always giving the right information. And if they choose to be said, that 100% that it will not be written as a suicide and it will be as
inanition, or dehydration,
or dehydration, so that because of insurance, etc.
Of course. So the information that I was given by the head investigator for the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office, that's the information they gave me. Other counties may have different approaches. Riverside County is kind of difficult on lots of different respects. So my suggestion would always be to double check something like that before saying with 100% certainty. I think you can comfortably say, I know a physician who checked with the head and lead investigator for medical examiner's office and was told that this is not considered suicide. And you're welcome. I mean, you could probably make a phone call and double check as well for your own comfort.
Can Faye share her dementia attachment to healthcare directive?
Can Faye share it?
Yeah. She's written a dementia attachment, which is in my papers, and I just wondered if she could share that with others.
And I'm sure she'd be happy to, and we have one as well. And the state of Washington has one, New York has one, but we've incorporated one into paperwork as well that we're happy to share with people. But I'm sure Faye would be as well.
Also, we have in our end-of-life planning booklet here at the table here, we have some of those available. We usually ask for a small donation just because it costs a few dollars to put together, but basically in that is some instruction about you're planning to deal with dementia before, of course, while your mind's still clear.
Okay, so before we, the next question, did I make it very clear, does everyone feel comfortable that the process of voluntarily stopping eating and drinking is not painful?
Yes.
And does not have to be terrifying? It can be comfortable, peaceful, if it's supported properly. And that's the key. It really needs to be done with the right support of a team that I would think needs to include a physician. Sometimes a hospice physician may be willing to provide that support, or a primary care doctor. It's certainly worth exploring that. But you don't want to, I would encourage you not to assume that others know, unless you specifically ask, have you supported people through this before? Do you know exactly what needs to happen? Don't assume that they will. It can be done beautifully, and everybody feel really comfortable with the process and the outcome, but it does require a certain amount of understanding and planning and engagement, okay? Just want to make sure that you're aware of that.
An observation with married couples, it's really sad to see one of the married couples to use a bullet, shoot the partner, and then read in the paper that it's a homicide-suicide.
When in fact, it was an act of love and compassion and desperation.
I've seen it in this year, I've read twice.
You're not gonna change the media. That's all.
Did we have somebody who wanted to talk about their experience?
Yes, we did.
Can we do that?
Lisa Winger was going to talk to us about her own personal
Working
experience.
was mine.
Yes.
Nobody can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. We have a couple more quick questions.
Okay.
Let's ask a couple more questions, and then we'll have Lisa share.
Okay.
And did you want to?
I have a personal experience.
Excellent.
Okay.
We want to hear that. And do you have one more question?
No, his personal experience.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Do you want to come up and talk, or do you want to do it there?
We'd hear better if you come up.
Do you want to come up so you can use the microphone?
My father, at age 83, chose this method, and I had written a short piece here at his bedside, and it tells quite a bit of, it gives you a little bit of an insight into what our experience was. I wrote this on November 11th in 1978, and I wrote, it's 5:30 a.m., November 11th, Saturday, a full week since we brought my father home from Hoag Hospital, beginning the 14th day since he took his last food, and the 9th day since any fluid had entered his body. His breathing is deep and regular at the moment. It is this way when he sleeps. When he wakes, it becomes shallower with occasional deep sighs. His pulse is about 90. His skin is pink and healthy looking and warm to my touch. He wants to die, but seems to be unable to. Just before I woke up, I was sleeping apparently with my mouth open, and upon waking, the inside of my mouth was uncomfortably dry. My father has been doing this open mouth breathing off and on for a week, yet will take no water, not even a few drops, to wet his dry mouth. And we didn't know about the sponges and other things, or we hadn't them anyway. Every once in a while he moans, "Oh God," but mostly he's quiet, except to tell me when he wants to use the urinal.
or to remind me to adjust the thermostat, or to say that he doesn't care for a particular record I've put on the stereo. He could not use his eyes without hurt. He had a chronic pain in his abdomen and had for 4 years, and no medical reason had been found. He spent 1 week at the UCLA Medical Center getting all kinds of diagnostic tests and whatnot, and they found nothing to treat him for. And at any rate, let's see. So his eyes didn't work. He had developed a sticky mouth. His saliva had changed 4 years before. For 4 years, he'd been going through this mysterious abdominal pain, which I think had to do with a terrible heartbreak. And at that time, psychosomatic medicine was not brand new at that time, but nobody ever, well, at any rate, there's more about that in a minute. But he couldn't see successfully. He had been unable to walk without 2 canes and just inch along for 2 years. And he had lost his driver's license, so he could no longer drive, which was the one pleasurable thing he could do. If my mother or I are not right by his bed so we can hear him speak, he gets our attention by hitting the metal railing of the hospital bed with a metal kitchen spoon, which we place near his hand on the bed. So I think my mother and I were the team. I was glad to get that word to use, because in being asked whether this method of dying is a good thing or a bad thing, I have to say, if there's a team, whether it's Bob or, is that your name? Mm-hmm. Okay. Or family. In our case, it was my mother and I. We were the team. I had been told by the doctor that had been unable to help him medically, and he had always had great faith in the medical community, and was terribly disappointed, I'm sure, after 4 years that they couldn't give him help for his physical illnesses. And so life had ceased to be any pleasure for him. But when we left the hospital, where we were told we could not stay unless he would permit tube feeding, and he had only been hospitalized not because of a medical condition. He thought he was going to have a bout of diarrhea, and he didn't want my mother to have to clean up a mess. So he called Hoag Hospital for an ambulance, and that's why he was in Hoag Hospital for just a few days until they dismissed him, because he wouldn't allow tube feeding, nor they did recommend a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist spoke to him and found that he was depressed. Well, I figured that was a logical frame of mind at that point after 4 years of suffering. And so for him, it was really not bad, but he had us for a team.
Thank you so much for your story.